The night sky exploded like a war zone, and for a second I thought I was dreaming, until the fire alarm shrieked through the house and the crackle of flames hit my ears like applause at the premiere of a nightmare. I shot out of bed, barefoot on the cold tile, adrenaline already surging. Through the window, my workshop, my pride, my second home. Ironically, the most secure building on my property, and it was burning. Not smoldering, not sparking, fully engulfed. A wall of fire roared with all the over-the-top drama of a bad action movie's grand finale. The glow lit the entire block, casting monstrous shadows as neighbors spilled out into the street, dressed in a chaotic mix of robes, panic, and gossip-thirsty stares. But above the gasps and rising sirens, one voice managed to cut through the noise. "I told you that Sheed was dangerous. Now look what happened." Karen, naturally, standing there in her highlighter pink robe like the queen of poor life choices, arms crossed, voice high-pitched and smug. What she didn't know, and what would become the ultimate twist in her HOA-fueled soap opera life, was that my workshop had been under active FBI surveillance. The moment she lit that match, she didn't just commit arson, she became a federal suspect. Just hours earlier, everything had been business as usual, or at least as usual as life gets, when you live 3 doors down from a woman who once called the city to complain that a kid's chalk art looked suspiciously like graffiti. I'd spent the afternoon working on a project I couldn't name, courtesy of a stack of NDAs and a tiny badge stamped with an eagle. Let's just say it involved encryption, signal isolation, and enough government-issued hardware to make a conspiracy theorist feel vindicated. Karen had been circling my property like a nosy hawk with a clipboard ever since I moved in 2 years ago. First it was, "Your lawn is in HOA-approved grass." Then it was, "Your security lights are disrupting my dog's chakra alignment." Her latest claim? That my shed was giving off weird energy. The only thing it emitted was brilliance, and maybe strong Wi-Fi. But Karen didn't know what a Faraday cage was. She lived by her yoga calendar and wielded the HOA bylaws like they were holy scripture. When the fire trucks pulled up, I braced for chaos, confusion, maybe even tears. What I didn't expect was the pair of unmarked black SUVs that rolled in behind the ladder truck. Out stepped men in suits, moving with the calm confidence of people who've stared down cartel leaders and international operatives. They didn't ask questions, just nodded at me and headed for the charred wreckage. One of them locked eyes with Karen for half a second. She froze mid-rant. That was the first crack in her smug expression. The second, when an agent murmured into his wrist mic and two plainclothes officers began sweeping the crowd with handheld infrared scanners. Karen slowly backed away, clutching her coffee mug like it might protect her. They pulled me aside. Their questions were fast, technical, precise. They weren't trying to figure out how the fire started. They already knew. What they wanted was confirmation. Was anything vital lost? Could it be rebuilt? Recovered? I told them everything was backed up, encrypted twice, stored off-site. One agent nodded and smiled. "Good man," he said. "We'll take it from here." That's when I knew this wasn't about a neighbor feud anymore. This was going to be a real case file, with surveillance records, phone taps, maybe even a sting operation. And Karen? Karen had just triggered her own personal unraveling. I should have been furious. My workshop, gone. Thousands in gear, incinerated. My quiet routine, up in smoke. But honestly, watching Karen circle the sidewalk like a clueless parade float, trying to rehearse her next excuse, it was oddly satisfying. She wasn't scared yet. That would come. For now, she still thought she was the neighborhood hero, thinking she'd saved the cul-de-sac from the scary tech guy with his blinking lights and mysterious boxes. What she didn't realize was that those boxes were part of a communications blackout array, one being tested for deployment in high-risk zones. She thought she'd destroyed a nuisance. What she'd really destroyed, a federally monitored test site, part of a joint agency program, and the kicker? It was all recorded. 3 months earlier, I'd submitted a routine security request to local law enforcement about some sketchy break-ins. A low-profile branch of the Bureau reached out. They'd been following a pattern, targeted thefts of high-end tech across upscale neighborhoods. My setup? Perfect bait. They asked if I'd be open to letting them monitor the area from nearby. In exchange, they'd ramp up my security and give me a heads up if any real threats came knocking. I agreed. We set up the works, cameras, pressure sensors, the full kit. What I didn't know at the time was that they'd parked a surveillance van 2 houses down with eyes on the place 24/7. But now, I was more than thankful. Every move Karen made that night, every step she took toward the workshop, every flick of her lighter, had been captured in high-def, time-stamped, audio-synced footage. Crystal clear. Back in the present, the fire was finally out. The crews were rolling up hoses, walking through the smoking debris, doing their assessments. That's when Karen made her move. She tried to stroll over, probably to throw in a smug, "I told you so," or offer a fake hug for the cameras. But the lead agent raised a hand and stopped her cold. "Ma'am, we'll need you to stay right there," he said, calm voice but sharp enough to cut through Kevlar. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" she asked, as if the FBI answered to the HOA president. The agent gave a nod and one of his colleagues stepped forward, a small recording device in hand. "We'd like to ask you a few questions regarding your whereabouts this evening. For the record." Her face drained from its usual peachy glow to a pale chalk white. I was asleep. I just saw the fire," she fumbled. "Actually," the agent said, opening a tablet and pressing play, "we have footage of someone matching your description entering the property at 12:43 a.m. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood was buzzing. Karen's name was on every tongue, and not in the good way. The footage? Leaked, blurry, but undeniable. It didn't take long for the internet to do its thing. Memes exploded. Karen versus FBI, the final showdown. When HOA meets CIA, Lady Torchlight rises again. My phone, blowing up. Some neighbors were in shock. Others brought muffins and coffee in solidarity. One guy even left a spray bottle labeled Karen Repellent, filled with glitter and vinegar. But I wasn't finished. This wasn't about revenge. It was just the start. Because what the agents told me next flipped the whole story on its head. Turns out Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a full-blown threat. And now, she'd wandered into territory she couldn't screech her way out of. The FBI had launched a formal investigation. And this time, Karen wasn't dealing with HOA bylaws. She was facing the federal government. And me? I was all in. I was ready to help them burn down her whole operation. Metaphorically speaking, I'd had enough real fires for one lifetime. The next morning, the neighborhood still buzzed like a beehive someone had punted. Voices floated over fences, across porches, through cracked windows. My phone rang nonstop. Neighbors, reporters, a city inspector, even my old college roommate, who somehow caught the clip online. But the only people I wanted to talk to were the two agents seated in my living room, sipping black coffee like it was any other Thursday. Not the morning after a federal sting was torched by a woman obsessed with wind chimes and zoning violations. Russo, the shorter of the two, was swiping through last night's surveillance footage on his tablet. The clarity was unreal. Infrared night vision had caught Karen's every move, right down to her clumsy crouch behind a trash bin before she lit the accelerant. They asked if I'd noticed anything suspicious about her before. I almost laughed. Karen was suspicious. That was her whole personality. This was the same woman who once filed a complaint over a mailbox painted too brightly, said it gave her migraines. She'd waged war on a family across the street because their toddler drew chalk hopscotch boxes too close to the curb. But apparently her meddling ran deeper than passive-aggressive HOA letters. The agents spoke carefully, choosing their words like they'd been trained to say just enough. There had been other incidents, neighborhood disturbances, accidental fires, all within HOAS across the region. In each case, the pattern was the same: sudden property damage, followed by a spike in insurance claims, a trail of unexplained sabotage, and one common name on every board: Karen Hollowell. I blinked. Karen wasn't just the neighborhood busybody. She was now being looked at as a potential suspect in a multi-state investigation involving insurance fraud and deliberate property destruction. They showed me screenshots from a forum where she posted anonymously, rants about non-compliant homes, calling for the removal of weak elements from the community. A week ago, I would have rolled my eyes. Now, it read more like a manifesto. The agent stood to leave, but not before giving me instructions. Stay calm. Don't provoke her. Pretend nothing has changed. And most importantly, don't rebuild. Not yet. They had plans. Or the trespassing. Or the fact that she nearly set half the street ablaze. She even attached a badly photoshopped image of my shed surrounded by cartoon biohazard symbols, one of which she claimed was proof of illegal satellite communication. That proof turned out to be a barbecue thermometer. The neighborhood wasn't buying it. Several residents hit reply all, flooding the thread with sarcasm, memes, and at least one photo of Karen passed out with a wine glass during the last HOA meeting. But Karen didn't back down. Oh no. If anything, the mockery fueled her. The more she was ridiculed, the louder she became. Soon she was showing up on neighbors' doorsteps, uninvited, handing out pamphlets. She'd started printing them herself, those wild pamphlets, shoving them into mail slots like she was running a grassroots campaign against reality. They were filled with warnings about security risks and civilian surveillance operations, and she was adamant I was part of it all. One neighbor dubbed her behavior apocalyptic grandma energy, and just like that, the nickname stuck. Someone even renamed the neighborhood WhatsApp group to Apocalyptic Grandma's HOA Watch. Meanwhile, the FBI had a front row seat to the entire unraveling. Surveillance had ramped up. A new listening device was mounted high on the telephone pole right outside Karen's house, disguised as a routine utility box, but tuned into every unhinged syllable. They let me listen to some of the intercepted audio. It was like tuning into late-night conspiracy radio, except it was real. One call had her rambling to a friend, presumably another board member, about deep state experiments hidden inside suburban homes. She claimed to have uncovered a rogue agent living right next door. That agent apparently was me. She described me in disturbing detail, said I was trained to blend in, too quiet, suspiciously absent from HOA barbecues, and didn't mow his lawn the right way. Apparently, being introverted and tech literate was now cause for federal alarm, at least in Karen's mind. The agents were half entertained, half concerned, because as Karen spiraled further, her grip on secrecy slipped. That same afternoon, they traced one of her burner email accounts back to a previously flagged IP from an arson case across state lines. The setup was disturbingly familiar. Karen labeled a property as a hazard, launched a whisper campaign, and then, mysterious fire, insurance payouts followed. She always had someone to blame. Old wiring, unsafe construction, inattentive homeowners. But this time, she hadn't just picked a fight with a quiet neighbor. She'd picked the worst possible target. So I played my part. Silent, withdrawn, didn't respond to her flyers or accusations, made no move to rebuild, at least not publicly. I let her think I was rattled. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was helping the agents with their next trap. They brought in a tech specialist to help us wire a new device. It looked like one of the old prototype cameras Karen might have remembered seeing before. Melted, singed, unremarkable. But inside, a pressure-triggered sensor, a motion detector, and 3 synchronized recording lenses. It wouldn't harm anyone, but the second it was touched, it would send an alert straight to the agents and start rolling footage from 3 angles. The theory was simple. Karen would come back, maybe to finish the job, maybe just to poke around. Either way, they needed it documented. And honestly, so did I. Then the media caught wind. Not the FBI sting, thank God, but the fire, the drama, the spiraling HOA Queen's rants. A local blogger showed up at my porch looking for a quote. I declined politely but firmly. I had no interest in feeding the fire with more headlines. Karen, of course, saw it as an opportunity. Within hours, she'd invited them into her home for what she called a truth-telling session. She wore oversized sunglasses and a floral scarf indoors, as if preparing for a courtroom sketch. She insisted the media wasn't ready for the real story, whatever that meant. The decoy array like it was a live bomb or treasure. She stood there swaying slightly, the red-tinted flashlight shaking just enough to reveal the tremor in her hands. From my window, I could see everything. The fake blueprints in the trash had done their job. The prototype housing label had sunk its hooks deep into her imagination, and now she was standing in what she believed was the epicenter of some vast conspiracy, ready to expose it all. Except she was the one being exposed. "She's at the structure," came the voice in my ear. Calm, precise. "Standing by for contact, trigger." Karen crouched, pulled something from her backpack, what looked like a phone and a small toolkit. She glanced over her shoulder once, quick and nervous, then leaned forward and placed her hand on the panel. Click. The pressure sensor tripped with a barely audible snap. Instantly, the hidden cameras activated. 3 synced lenses captured her from multiple angles. Crouched, hand on the device, flashlight beam cutting through the smoke-stained debris like a laser in a noir film. She was mid-motion, pulling what looked like a mini crowbar from her bag when the floodlights flared on, cutting through the night like a stage reveal. Karen froze. For one long second, nothing moved. Then came the shuffle of boots and quiet shouts. "Federal agents, stay where you are." From the van, 2 agents emerged, flanking her from either side. Another unit came from behind my house, having circled around the back. Karen turned to run, but tripped over the same scorched frame she'd once set alight. She hit the ground hard, the red flashlight spinning into the darkness like a dying flare. They didn't rough her up. They didn't need to. She was caught, not just in the act, but in a net of her own making. Audio logs, burner emails, falsified HOA documents, and now live footage of a federally surveilled site being tampered with by the self-declared community savior. I stepped away from the window as the agents cuffed her. It felt surreal, like watching the final scene of a show I didn't audition for, but somehow ended up starring in. By 12:38 a.m., she was in the back of the unmarked SUV. The street was still, quiet except for the low hum of radios and the click of car doors shutting. Then the van pulled away. It was over, sort of, because now came the aftermath. Statements, case filings, federal proceedings, the quiet kind of chaos. But as I looked out at the charred remnants of the workshop, the fake blueprints still fluttering in the breeze, I realized something. The shed wasn't the trap. I was. And Karen, she never stood a chance. The device resembled a power converter, bolted to a steel frame. Her fingers twitched as she reached into her bag and pulled something out. A matchbook, followed by another bottle of accelerant. The agents weren't about to stop her yet. They needed her to go all the way, to commit fully, unmistakably, and with evidence. She knelt down and began to pour the liquid, soaking the fake device. Every splash echoed in my earpiece. One agent whispered, "Recording initiated. Camera 3 has the angle. Let her strike." I couldn't believe any of this was happening, that a feud in the HOA had snowballed into a full-blown federal sting. But there she was, striking a match with the conviction of someone who honestly believed she was doing the world a favor. Just as she held the flame up, the agent finally gave the command, "Go!" From the shadows, 3 agents appeared like phantoms. One grabbed her arm right as the flame came dangerously close to the device. She let out a scream, shrill and animalistic, and dropped the match. It fizzled as it hit the ground. The other 2 agents were already on her, securing her arms and barking clear, authoritative orders. "Karen Hollowell, you are under arrest for arson, tampering with federal property, and interfering with an active surveillance site. You have the right to remain silent." But she didn't. She shrieked about setups, conspiracies, about being the only one who truly saw what was happening. Her words came out like a storm, wild, erratic, senseless, flung in every direction. Neighbors had begun emerging from their homes, drawn out by the commotion. One woman even filmed it all from her porch and uploaded the video before the night ended. Karen was shoved into the back of an unmarked SUV, still howling, kicking like a banshee. Her mugshot would be trending before sunrise. And the aftermath? It got even wilder. With Karen in custody, the FBI passed portions of their case to the local DA and police. She wasn't just a neighborhood menace anymore. She was officially connected to at least 3 suspicious fires, one of which had caused over $500,000 in damages to a senior living facility. Digital records linked her to fake identities used to rig HOA board votes across multiple counties. She'd set up dummy accounts to siphon money from community budgets and disguise her arsons as flukes, tragedies that just happened to lead to generous insurance payouts. She'd been orchestrating a full-blown criminal enterprise right from her living room, all while masquerading as a champion for community values. The neighborhood was in shock. HOA leadership collapsed within days. Board members either stepped down in shame or were removed under federal investigation. An emergency election was held, and for once, reasonable people won. One of the first motions passed was a formal apology to me, signed by more than 24 families. Another was the disbanding of Karen's beloved Property Aesthetic Oversight Committee, the one she'd used as a weapon to bully anyone who didn't meet her narrow vision of taste. A week later, I stood in front of the newly framed shell of my workshop, shaking hands with the lead agent who'd run the sting. He handed me a folder. Inside were declassified photos from Karen's arrest, a letter of commendation for my help, and a sealed envelope labeled Federal Partnership Recognition. "You handled this better than some people with a badge," he told me. I nodded, still kind of in disbelief. Then he added, "Ever consider a career in cybercrime investigation?" I laughed. Not until my neighbor tried to blow up my shed. The irony still hit hard. The same woman who used to rant about my wind chimes being too modern had just been taken down by her own inability to leave people alone. She thought she was torching a nuisance. What she actually did was spark a federal probe that burned her entire empire to the ground. The weeks that followed Karen's arrest felt like a whole new neighborhood. The air seemed lighter, like the long-standing tension had finally lifted. People who used to keep their heads down now waved as they walked by. Kids played on the sidewalks again, no longer shadowed by fear of being tattled on for laughing too loud. Even the old man with the wind spinner collection brought them back out, proud like trophies reclaimed. The silence that used to hang over us like a threat had turned into peace. Karen was gone, and with her, the madness she cloaked in bylaws and bogus violations. My workshop was finally rebuilt, this time with reinforced concrete, steel framing, and security systems advanced enough for a small bank. The FBI didn't just vanish after the arrest either. They helped install upgraded surveillance and even linked me up with a private defense tech company that offered to sponsor a chunk of my work as part of a research initiative. Turns out, my encrypted relay project had caught the attention of some important people higher up the food chain. And just like that, I wasn't just the weird neighbor with blinking lights anymore. I was now a verified asset in a low-tier defense initiative. I didn't get a badge or anything official looking, but the upgraded equipment came with documentation that reclassified my workshop under a new legal designation. That meant if any nosy neighbor tried snooping around again, they'd be wandering into restricted territory without even realizing it. I was now, by design, Karen-proof. The neighborhood HOA had been dissolved and rebuilt under fresh leadership. Pete, the same guy who brought over beer after the fire, got elected president. He was the type who believed more in barbecues than bureaucracy. His first act? Tossing the old violation log into a fire pit during the neighborhood's first ever HOA free weekend cookout. I showed up with a folding chair and a plate full of ribs. People kept coming over to thank me. At first it felt weird. I hadn't asked for any of this. I just wanted to be left alone, to build, to create, to enjoy a bit of peace and privacy. But now folks looked at me like I was the reason they could finally breathe easy in their own homes. I guess that's what happens when the neighborhood tyrant turns out to be a felon, and the quiet guy turns out to be working with the feds. Karen's trial date was set for the fall. Until then, she was being held without bail, thanks to the severity of the charges and her risk of flight. And the evidence? It just kept piling up as the case expanded. Bank statements, burner phone records, audio files. It was like every shady move she'd ever made was finally catching up with her. Fast. And she wasn't just facing arson now. There were federal fraud charges, racketeering, identity theft, misappropriation of community funds, even tampering with federal evidence. One of the agents who still checked in told me she was already trying to cut a deal, blaming mysterious co-conspirators, saying someone else had convinced her to light those fires. No one was buying it. Meanwhile, life moved on. My mornings were mostly spent tinkering with code and hardware in the new lab, sipping strong coffee with classical music humming in the background. It was quiet, peaceful, almost like something I'd earned. The surveillance equipment still stayed online, but mostly to test my own devices now. One time a stray cat triggered the sensors and I nearly jumped out of my skin, then just laughed at myself. After everything that had happened, I had every reason to be on edge. But instead, I felt calmer than I had in years. Maybe because the worst had already come, and it hadn't broken me. Naturally, the story went viral. Some Reddit user posted a clip of the local news segment about Karen's arrest to the Entitled People subreddit with the title, "A Shoe Karen Tried to Burn My Workshop." Didn't know the FBI was watching. It exploded. Thousands of comments, some shocked, some hilarious. People shared their own HOA horror stories and cheered Karen's downfall like it was the season finale of a series they'd been binging. Someone even drew a comic strip of Karen getting cuffed by agents with FBI spelled in glitter on their jackets. It was completely surreal, watching my life become meme material, but honestly, kind of healing. The internet had taken something chaotic and spun it into comedy, and after everything, it felt good to laugh. As a final touch, I installed a large wooden sign near the entrance to my new workshop. Carved from reclaimed oak, the words were laser engraved: Federal Site, Surveillance Active, Car-Free Zone. A neighbor jokingly stuck a plastic eagle on top. Now every time someone new moved into the neighborhood, somebody would walk them over and point at the sign like it was a monument. It wasn't just a warning, it was a story, burned into wood. But there was one more surprise. A few weeks after everything was finished, I got a letter in the mail. It came straight from the Department of Justice. Inside was a formal thank you for my cooperation and patience during the case. There was also a check, not huge, but enough to help cover some of the damages, and a handwritten note signed by the lead agent himself. It read, "Most civilians would have panicked. You stayed calm, stayed sharp, and helped us stop someone dangerous. That matters. Thank you." I folded the letter carefully and framed it above my new workbench. It wasn't a trophy, but it felt like closure. Proof that sometimes, even in the most absurd, flaming, Karen-infested situations, the good guys really do win. And from that day forward, anytime a nosy neighbor stared too long at my property, I didn't worry. I smiled, waved, and let them wonder. This house had already been through a fire, a federal sting, and a takedown operation. If anyone else wanted to try something dumb, they'd better show up with a badge or a damn good lawyer. Karen's chapter was closed. Mine, it was just getting started.